What's up, guys? This is Coach Grant with First Down Training, and today we're going to be breaking down a great wide receiver football IQ quiz to test your knowledge of the position. So I hope this video helps you guys out. Hope it could teach you a few new things. But also, fellas, if you are a wide receiver and you would like a daily on-field training schedule with the exact drills to follow with sets, reps, check out that very first link in the description below for our 8-week wide receiver on-field workout plan. We give you over 200 plus drills that you can do as a wide receiver over the course of 8 weeks. Everything's broken down for you: sets, reps, an example of each drill. So check out that very first link in the description below if you would like that daily training schedule. Let's get started with this video. So if you're not familiar with our quiz style videos, how we're going to do this is we're going to show a pre-snap look. I'm going to ask you how you would run a route versus that look, give you a chance to answer the question, maybe write it down if you have a piece of paper, and then we'll break this thing down and explain if you were correct or wrong. Okay, so now, first clip we're going to be looking at here, this is against an inside shade press coverage look, and this is kind of a two-part question. So the first part, how would you guys run a post route versus this specific coverage? So first part of the question, how would you run a post route versus inside shade press? So you guys can go ahead and pause the video and think about your answer. So pause the video. Okay, let's break this thing down. So number one, coming up to the line of scrimmage, if you've been following these videos, you know this, that we need to have a pre-snap process, right? So the pre-snap process is three parts. Number one, I need to identify the leverage of the DB, how close or how far he is, and what type of coverage is it. So we already gave it away in the beginning of the question. He's inside leverage, right? So that means a couple of things. That means the DB is trying to take away the inside, and he's trying to force you to the outside. So when I have to run a post, that's kind of a problem, right? Because that's an inside breaking route, and this DB is taught not to give up the inside. Now, number two, how close or how far he is. He's in press. He's pretty much right up on that line of scrimmage. And then number three, what type of coverage is it? That's an easy one. He's in man, especially because it's one-on-ones. So now the reason why we have to learn all those things is that's how I decide to run the route. I ask you how to run the route versus this coverage. That's what gives you the answers to the test. So since he's inside shade, do you guys think you would want to maybe set him up to the outside, maybe like a diamond release, get his hips to flip, and then slip under and run the post? No. Because that DB, when he's inside shade, is taught, do not give up the inside. And a diamond release would take too long on this specific situation. What you would have to do is get comfortable taking an outside release, even on an inside breaking route versus inside shade press. And that's what this wide receiver does. So off the line, he gives a quick move to the inside like a speed release, which is correct, and I'll explain why in a second. He stacks him and then is able to win on that post route. So why did he give this quick like little speed jab release to the inside? He probably could have sold this move a little bit more, maybe stepped into the DB, but he did that because he's in press right up on the line. Now, if this DB were off, let's say, for example, he was maybe in this like catch technique, 2 to 3 yards off, this release wouldn't work because there'd be too much of a gap between the two of us. He would have to close the space, then give a jab inside. And that's why in your pre-snap process, you need to dictate how close or how far he is. So he attacks his leverage and takes that outside release. Now, I know a lot of you probably would be a little uncomfortable with this situation. Outside release on an inside breaking route. Because you're thinking, well, in this case scenario, it worked because this wide receiver was able to stack this DB. And stack is when you get this DB to be trailing your back hip. So when you have him trailing your back hip, you could use a move at the top of the break like a rocker step where you sell to the outside with your upper body. And that's going to tie into the second part of this question. But also, let's say you don't get him stacked, and let's say you took that outside release, but this DB is right on your hip. If you said you'd want to stack and give a move or work a throw by where you take your inside hand, you put it on the back of this DB's shoulder or hip and slip underneath, that would be correct as well. You got to have a plan at the top of the route. Off the line, with your pre-snap process, it's all about keeping timing and keeping spacing with the quarterback. If you come off the line and you said you want to try to take an inside release, if you force an inside release versus a disciplined inside shade DB, and this DB might not even be disciplined, but if we do come across a disciplined guy and he holds his leverage and squeezes us to the middle of the field, that is going to throw off the spacing and the timing of the route. So I'm going to play this full speed, and this is the second part of the question. What do you think this wide receiver could have done better? This is the right idea. He did the right thing. He got separation. He won the rep by a mile. But what could have made the route better? Because there's always that extra 1% that wide receivers can do. So I'm going to play this full speed. So he comes off. What do you think could have made this route better? So I'm going to play it one more time, and then I'll give you a chance to pause the video. So I'm going to play it again one more time. So think about the break point here. Think about the rocker steps. You guys can go ahead and pause the video and think about your answer. Okay, you guys can play the video now. So now, when he's doing this rocker step at the top of the break, I want you to pay attention to his pad level, right? Because a disciplined DB in press coverage, man coverage, where are his eyes going to be? His eyes are going to be watching the wide receiver's hips, right? So if he's watching your hips and right before the break point, you come off, or let's say you come off the ball, you got good pad level there, you got a slight forward lean, you're running hard. Everything about this looks like a deep fade to get this DB to think fade. But right before the break point, you start to pop up and start to lean up with your chest. That's an indicator it's no longer a fade. You better be able to sell that rocker step to the outside if you raise that pad level, because that is a dead indicator to this DB that a break is coming. So make sure we keep that good, consistent pad level all the way throughout any route. Whether I have this DB stacked, whether he's on my hip, whether it's zone coverage, you need to make sure that we do not raise my chest up, because that raise of your chest, one, will slow you down, will make your cuts be outside your frame a little bit, but also gives away the route. So fellas, just make sure we keep a good pad level. If that's what you said about that route, that would be correct. So I'm going to play this full speed. Again, right idea, right release, great rocker step. Just we need to make sure we have a good pad level. We could always get better on every single rep. Okay, so now this is going to be a little bit of a change of pace. So we're going to be talking a lot about coverage on this specific example. So it's very, very important for wide receivers to know how to read coverages, because it teaches you how you could sit in different zones. And that's what we're going to be discussing on this. And this is something that we don't cover a lot on this channel. So I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to draw out a play concept for you guys, and we are going to be simulating like we are this wide receiver, so the number one wide receiver. So this is like a dagger concept out of bunch, and I'm going to tell you what coverage it is right now. This is going to be like, it looks a little bit like cover 6, which is where one side of the field is in cover 2, and then one side of the field is in cover 4 quarters. But this ends up being like kind of a true cover 4 look across the board, or it might be like a man coverage situation here where they like tag man coverage, and it's almost like 2-man on this side of the field. It's a little bit of an interesting coverage. I'm not trying to confuse you too much with the coverage. I mainly want you to focus on this side of the field, and this side is the quarter side, so cover 4. So in cover 4, we know that they break the field up into 4 like quadrants, right? The 4 quarters of the field. So he's got a deep fourth, he has a deep fourth, and then if these guys are playing cover 4 too, they would have deep fours. So this side of the field is that scenario. So this outside backer right here, this nickel, I should say, is going to be able to have the flat. He's covering the flats, right? So that's where his responsibility is. So this Mike backer is going to be dropping and covering this like middle hook to curl area. And then obviously he's bailing into that deep fourth. Maybe not so much bailing as the safety. So that's what cover 4 is. So if I'm a wide receiver and I come up to the line and I see that, right? I see a safety who's about 8 yards off. See the corner's looking like he's going to bail. I see that it looks like a 4-3 front. That tells me a few things, and that's part of the question I'm going to ask. So the play concept is this number 3 wide receiver here is running a flat route. This point man, which is Tyreek Hill, is running a seam. And then we have like a 12-yard dig coming across. So what I want to ask you about this dig is, do you think you will be getting the football in the first window or the second window? And do you think you want to continue accelerating after this break, or do you want to throttle down based on your answer? So do you think you get this ball in the first window or the second window? So you guys can go ahead and pause the video and think about your answer. So pause the video. Okay, let's break this thing down. So this ends up being a bad route from this wide receiver because he does not sit in the open window, and that would be the first window. So let's explain it. So he's coming out here, he's running his route. You see how we check to the flat? He should have sat right there in that window because he kept running on this thing, and that makes it a very, very tough throw because the quarterback knows that that's what's going to come open. The quarterback's read, this guy kind of checks the defensive end here and then releases late to the flat, brings this nickel down. There's a throwing window right here. The quarterback's read, his eyes are going to be going straight to this safety. If that safety runs with that seam, then we should be hitting that dig right in that first window. But again, that Mike backer drops. This wide receiver doesn't know to throttle down, and he keeps running, which leaves the quarterback no other option to have to force that thing. Should the quarterback probably ate the ball? Yes, absolutely. But the wide receiver should have settled in that first window. That's why as a wide receiver, you need to understand play concepts. You need to understand what a play is trying to accomplish, where that ball is going to be thrown. You have to almost think like a quarterback, and that's where you build that chemistry. They talk about it all the time, Sunday night football, Sunday football. They talk all the time about guys who are ex-quarterbacks, like Julian Edelman, Travis Kelce. They're like, oh, they know where to sit in coverages. This is what they are talking about. Because on this play, again, we're trying to pull the flat defender, So that's going to open up a window. And this wide receiver, if he would have just throttled down there, that Mike backer would have been sitting in the middle. Quarterback has an easy throwing window to fit that thing in there. You just have to know these types of coverages, fellas. And then again, you got to know coming out of the break, let's say that Mike backer, let's say he jumps with the flats, this nickel. We break here, that Mike backer jumps to that first window, that's when you would carry on to the second window sometimes. Because if he's over anxious, chances are that's probably not what he will do. But if he tries to jump the quarterback's eyes, that's when you could sit in that second window. It's all about being able to get a read on certain linebackers when coming over the middle. And also it's about knowing a pre-snap coverage and what that coverage is trying to accomplish. When it's a 4-3 look like this, and by 4-3 we mean 4 down linemen, 3 linebackers, we know that this guy, if the corner is off and bailing, is probably going to be jumping the flats. So that's a window for that QB. Let's play this thing again, full speed one more time. This wide receiver just needs to make sure that he sits and throttles down in that first window to make it an easier throw for that QB. All right, fellas, so this next example here, we're going to be talking about, or the question I'm going to be asking you guys is how would you run a post route versus this specific coverage, and what leverage or how can you tell what leverage the DB has? So how would you run a post route versus this coverage, and how do you tell what leverage the DB has in this scenario? So you guys go ahead and pause the video and think about your answer. So pause the video. All right, let's break this thing down. So first things first here, how do we determine the leverage of the DB in this case? You want to look at the hash. If you're lined up on the outside of the hash, right? So like, again, from this angle, it might look like this DB is head up, squared up with him. But when we look at the hash marks, and this is what can help you guys when you're studying film, we look at the hash and we see that this DB is lined up on the hash and the wide receiver is lined up to the outside of the hash. So that means that he's where? He's inside leverage. So if you had to run a post route versus inside shade off man, because again, remember my pre-snap process, I got to identify his leverage, how close or how far he is, and what type of coverage is it. So remember, if we had to run a post route and it was press man inside shade, we'd attack him, take the outside release, and work to stack or throw by and slip under. But now since he's off, I'm not going to be able to attack him and stack. If my break's at 10 yards, I got to break at 10 yards. So what I would want to do is my goal is to try to flip his hips. Very similar to how if this DB was inside shade press on a slant, you would take off on a diamond release, get him to flip and slip back underneath him. So it's the same thing. It's just a longer slant and this DB's deeper, so you would treat it the exact same way. So this wide receiver comes off and he attacks the outside shoulder and gives this hard cut to the outside, giving him that separation on that post. If that's what you guys said you should do, attack the outside shoulder, that would be 100% correct. If you said you would want to try to stem him inside and step on his toes, that would be wrong. Because the second you start to attack that DB's leverage and stem him, he is going to keep his leverage inside. They call that a weave. So when you break, you're going to be breaking right into him, or you're going to try to break underneath him and catch this ball almost on the opposite hash, which is not realistic to a real game. If you attack that outside shoulder, you could sell fade. You get him to flip those hips by selling with good pad level, good stride, good speed, everything that sells fade that can get that DB to flip that hip. And then we could slip underneath him easy with plenty of spacing. This is a realistic route. And that's how I always want you guys to train. That's how I always want you guys to approach one-on-ones. Make sure that your routes are realistic. Let's go ahead and play this thing again, full speed one more time. This is a textbook post versus that inside shade off man coverage example here from this wide receiver. All right, fellas, I really want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to leave those in the comment section below. Always appreciate the feedback. It's always great to hear from you guys. And again, fellas, if you would like a full 2-month-long wide receiver on-field workout schedule, everything you do on the field as a wide receiver to improve your game, check out that very first link in the description below. We'd love to get you on that. I'll see you guys next time.